The little girl was standing alone in the middle of a crowded crosswalk, frozen in fear as cars blared their horns and rushed around her like a river breaking against a stone. In the middle of a bright Monday morning, while hundreds of people hurried toward office towers and business meetings, one exhausted single father dropped everything and ran straight into danger for someone he had never met. What he didn't know was that those few seconds would cost him the biggest opportunity of his life, and change his future forever. Before we begin, if you believe kindness still matters in this world, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to LifeLine Tales. Your support helps bring more emotional stories like this to life, and your single comment could inspire someone who's struggling today. The cold sunlight spilled across downtown Seattle as Rowan Mercer stepped out of the subway station holding his son's tiny backpack in one hand and a folder full of resumes in the other. His 7-year-old son, Eli, walked beside him in a faded blue hoodie, still half asleep from the early morning rush. Rowan had barely slept the night before. Bills were piled on the kitchen counter, the electricity notice was overdue, and the rent payment was already 10 days late. After losing his warehouse supervisor job 3 months earlier due to company layoffs, every day had become a battle against humiliation, exhaustion, and fear. But this day felt different. That morning, Rowan had finally landed an interview with a massive technology company called Norvale Industries. The position paid enough to completely change their lives. It meant stability, health insurance, a better apartment, maybe even the chance to buy Eli the bicycle he kept staring at through the pawn shop window every afternoon. As Rowan walked quickly through the crowded streets, his heart pounded with nervous hope. He checked his watch constantly. The interview was only 30 minutes away, and being late could destroy his chances before they even began. Eli held tightly onto his father's hand, sensing the stress hidden beneath Rowan's calm face. Then everything changed in an instant. A small girl in a yellow coat suddenly stepped off the sidewalk and wandered into the busy street ahead. She couldn't have been older than 6. Her stuffed rabbit dangled from one hand as she stood motionless between moving traffic, terrified by the noise surrounding her. People gasped, but nobody moved fast enough. Rowan didn't think. He dropped his folder, sprinted forward, and reached the girl just as a black SUV slammed its brakes inches away from them. The sound of screeching tires echoed through the street. Rowan wrapped his arms around the frightened child and carried her back onto the sidewalk while drivers shouted. The little girl burst into tears, trembling violently against his chest. Rowan knelt beside her, trying to calm her down while scanning the crowd for her parents. Eli stood nearby clutching his father's resume papers that had scattered across the wet pavement. Minutes passed before a sharply dressed woman came running through the crowd with tears streaming down her face. She pulled the girl into her arms, overcome with relief and shock. The woman thanked Rowan repeatedly, unable to stop crying as she held her daughter tightly. Rowan simply nodded, checked his watch, and felt his stomach drop. He was already 20 minutes late. Without another word, Rowan grabbed Eli's hand and rushed toward the office building several blocks away. Sweat soaked through his shirt as they entered the towering glass lobby of Norvale Industries. The receptionist looked at him with immediate disapproval. His tie was crooked, his shoes were wet, and his resume folder was bent from the chaos outside. The interview panel had already started without him. Despite his desperate apologies, Rowan could feel the opportunity slipping away before he even sat down. The executives barely looked interested. One interviewer kept glancing at the clock while another questioned his employment gap with cold impatience. Rowan tried his best, but his confidence had already collapsed. He knew he looked tired. He knew he sounded desperate. 40 painful minutes later, the interview ended with polite smiles that carried no warmth. As Rowan walked out of the building with Eli beside him, the crushing weight of failure settled into his chest. He had sacrificed his chance for a stranger. Rationally, he knew he had done the right thing, but fear whispered something cruel inside him anyway. Kindness didn't pay rent. Kindness didn't feed children. The next morning, Rowan sat inside a laundromat scrolling through rejection emails while Eli colored superheroes beside him. The hum of washing machines filled the silence between them. Rowan stared blankly at his phone, trying to figure out how much longer they could survive before eviction became unavoidable. Then his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. At first, Rowan assumed it was another debt collector. But the calm voice on the other end introduced herself as Vivian Hale, CEO of Norvale Industries. Rowan froze. Vivian explained that she had been the woman from the street the day before. The little girl Rowan saved was her daughter, Claire. After arriving late to the office herself, Vivian reviewed the interview schedule and recognized Rowan's name immediately. She had watched the building security footage of him arriving soaked, breathless, and carrying a frightened child's stuffed rabbit in his coat pocket because the girl had forgotten it during the chaos. Vivian confessed something that stunned him even more. The interview panel had rejected him. But she personally overruled the decision. Not because he saved her daughter, but because anyone willing to risk everything for a stranger while his own life was falling apart possessed the kind of integrity money couldn't teach. Vivian told Rowan that companies could train skills, but they couldn't train character. She offered him not just the job, but a leadership position with better pay than the original role. Rowan covered his face with trembling hands as tears finally escaped after months of holding everything inside. Eli looked up in confusion before realizing his father was crying from happiness for the first time in years. Life slowly began to change after that day. The tiny apartment no longer felt hopeless. Rowan could finally buy groceries without calculating every dollar in panic. Eli got his bicycle. The overdue notices disappeared from the kitchen counter. Most importantly, Rowan no longer carried the crushing shame of feeling like he had failed his son. Months later, during Norvale's annual charity event, Rowan saw Claire again. The little girl in the yellow coat ran across the garden smiling brightly before hugging him tightly around the waist. Vivian stood nearby watching silently, knowing one impossible moment in traffic had rewritten several lives at once. Sometimes the world changes not because of power, money, or success, but because one exhausted person chooses compassion when it would have been easier to walk away. If this story touched your heart even a little, please like, share, and comment below to support LifeLine Tales. Stories like these remind people that kindness still exists, even in the hardest moments. And before the story ends, tell us in the comments, have you ever helped someone without knowing how deeply it would change your own life?